This conference will now be recorded.
All right, hey everyone, it's Rebecca. We're official now. So I'd like to welcome you on this sunny day to our Restart Guidance for Directors presentation and Q&A session. Thank you to everyone who sent questions in advance. You sent a lot of questions, which is completely understandable given what we're faced with and the literal hour-by-hour changes that we are experiencing right now. So what we're planning to do here today, and by we, I'm talking about Casey and myself, we're going to give you just a little bit of like a situation report just to say, at this point on Thursday, May 21st at 3:30 in the afternoon, here's where we are, here's what we understand, and then using that context to answer the questions that you sent in. If you have additional questions that occur to you during the session, you can always pop them in the chat box and we'll be sure to try to get to them. If we can't get to everything today, we're going to use the same process we used for the paid sick leave issue, where we issued a print answers to frequently asked questions that summarizes everything that we were able to do today and what occurred during the event or right after the event. We know the list is just going to grow, and that's, like I said, totally fine. We completely understand, and we're doing our best to get the answers that we can. So I'm going to jump in here today and just give you a sense of how we're structuring the day so that you know what to expect. We know that you got a crash course yesterday in when in-person public service can begin. And for all the association libraries on the line feeling super smug that you know what's going on, we're going to give you a little update because we understand there's a meeting happening literally right now in Albany on the topic of association libraries. So we'll give you our sense of what that might look like in the next 24 hours. We're going to go over what we're calling the restart checklist, which I think is just another way to look at the information you're already working your way through to make sure it matches with what's on your list. We'll do a super short intro to the phased reopening template that Casey has created for us all, which I heard many of you commenting before we began that you're already using it. I know some of you have told me that you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, so we just want to point out a couple of features of it for you, and then we're going to get right into the answers to frequently asked questions. We know that's what you're here for today. We want to try to get you as much info as you can. Let's see. Cool. Casey, did I forget anything?
No, I think you got it. I think it'll be a good day.
Oh, so positive. That's great. All right. So the big question on everyone's mind was, when can we start curbside? And when we talk about opening libraries, most people are actually referring to curbside service. At this point, I've been lucky enough to be invited to almost all 5 county directors meetings, and we're all talking about curbside as the first thing we do. And so yesterday we saw some unexpected guidance be issued. I would say dead of night, but it happened midday. But it happened certainly out of line with anything we had heard from the State Education Department or the New York Library Association or our other contacts in Albany. We'd been told for weeks to expect to see libraries in phase 2 and to expect all types of libraries to be included in the guidance at the same time. Instead, what we saw happen was the new business lookup tool, all of a sudden the entry was upgraded for libraries to include public libraries, which includes municipal, special district, and school district public libraries, allowing for curbside service right now, statewide. There you go. So that completely changed how people were thinking about timelines. And I really appreciated what Gloria was saying before we started the event today, that, after getting over the shock of that change to the plans and the thinking that we all had, the reminder was still there that there's still a plan in place locally, that you're still working towards your safety goals and policies and procedures. And hopefully with the coordination with your board of trustees, it doesn't mean you have to open right now. It just means the door is open to do so if it works for you and your planning process and where you find yourself. At the same time, it does create a bit of a PR issue, as there's some messaging coming out in one part of the system that we're not seeing in other parts of the system, that this also applies to association libraries, which as of this literal moment is not the case. Right now, we're still waiting to see where they would put association libraries. But the meeting that I mentioned with the Empire State Development Corporation right now is happening. We understand that work is being done to have association libraries included in the language that was issued yesterday. And that, again, is not where association libraries expected. They thought, hey, we're going to be in phase 1 because that's what they told us 12 hours ago. I've had about 4 or 5 different conversations today that indicate the new thinking is that they'll They will start talking about libraries all as one unit, but it sounds like instead of putting us into a phase, they're basically saying, go ahead now if you want to. So I think this does speak to the fact of the need for really good communication, on your website, in your messaging on social media, obviously with your board and staff, but really centering the conversation about readiness. It's very nice to have the green light, but that doesn't mean you're actually ready. And there's plans to be done, and I know you're all working hard on them. And so that's what we want to focus on today, which is to get you the information you need to feel confident about your plans and to answer some of those open-ended things you might have on your list right now. So I actually have 3 friends texting me right now because they're in the legislative committee meeting, which has someone who's linked to someone in the Empire State Development call. And so they all know we're doing this presentation at Mid-Hudson today. And they're like, we're going to let you know as soon as we know. And I'm like, yeah, well, how exciting for us. But as of today, this is what we know. By the time I issue perhaps the end of day message, we might see something different, or by tomorrow. So I hope you know by now, as soon as I learn stuff, I'm doing my best to pass it right on to you, because I know you're doing your best to manage your messaging both inside your organization and with your community. So we realize that now with this kind of green light for at least the public libraries in this moment, that we've got libraries who are planning to reopen as soon as next week. So what we've done is created a spreadsheet for each county, and it's modeled on some good work done down in Dutchess County. So each county chair was provided with a spreadsheet for their county for you to fill in what your current thinking is, when you think you might open, what that open might look like for you, what services you're thinking of doing. And we think this will really be helpful to make sure your neighboring libraries understand what's going on, to perhaps avoid inadvertent, someone being really outside the pack on starting curbside or not. So you can get a sense of that. And I think just to, share information amongst peers, which is super helpful right now. And then we'll be issuing an official form, which will look very similar to the form we used when you shut down your facilities. So we'll be looking for you to let us know officially when you're starting up curbside, and then you can go back in and update that form anytime you want when perhaps you open up your building, but you don't have to. What we're looking for is, are you starting curbside, and what that date is when you know it. And Lori just asked me to pass along to you that when you do pick a date, to just remember you're going to need to submit a ticket within 1 business day before that to make sure they can get things set up in Sierra so things go smoothly for you. And on Friday, when we do our director's briefing, which I'm fairly sure is tomorrow, today's Thursday, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. Lori's been working on upgrading the Sierra documentation for, what to do in Sierra when you check something in, and how do you handle notices, and what that looks like in the curbside environment before Mid-Hudson delivery starts up.
You can get a book and read, but stay in here, okay?
So just a reminder that if you're not muted and you've got some noise going on, please do mute yourself. Thank you. So you'll have more information about this in the end of day notice, as well as in the bulletin. Any questions, you can let me know. So we just tried to, we realized we feel like there's so much information that has come at you over the past few weeks, and things have changed, and documents are flying, and there's different things all over the place. I know I work well with a checklist of things that I have to get to until I can get to the next stage of something. And so this is what the checklist looks like in our head, at least, when we took a look at what's mandated and what we know is really important to keep staff and the public safe and to keep you sane. This is what that looks like. And many of you are well on your way in the procurement. I know we still have instances of libraries struggling with at least the cleaning product end of things. And if you're still having trouble with that, just let us know. We're happy to help you source stuff. Procedurally, what we did is we pulled out the mandated items in the safety plan template, because they're things that just kind of get buried in 11 pages of guidance that sometimes you just need them highlighted and pulled out for you. So there you go. Those are things that you'll need to have procedures for. Appointing a COVID-19 coordinator, kind of that point person for the log keeping and tracing, which we'll talk about in a second. The cleaning protocols, which Casey is linked to, the CDC and EPA cleaning protocols, your employee screening procedure, which we're obviously going to talk more about today because everyone had lots of questions about that, as well as the cleaning log, and the employee and visitor log, which we're also going to talk more about today. That seemed to be a high, I think a lot of people are working on that today because I got a lot of questions about it today. And then obviously your facility prep, the signage that you're going to be using to convey information in a way that actually connects with people. Always thinking about the fact that the less words you have, the better, the more graphical it can be, the better. We've shared on our COVID-19 resources page at least one signage signage collection from the Ohio Library Commission. That might be a nice place to start just to get you going if you're not a graphic design wizard like Jillian down in Butterfield. Social distancing markers, and that refers to things you might have seen when you've gone grocery shopping, things that help someone queue in line with the appropriate 6 feet of distance in between them. Things for staff in the staff work areas. How do you indicate, don't get too close, or here's where we need maybe a different intervention to help enforce social distancing or make it possible, particularly for smaller libraries that are struggling with these issues. And your quarantine storage solution. We just wanted to remind you that at this time, we can't have you using the Mid-Hudson delivery bins as long-term quarantine storage solutions. So if you need to buy other boxes or find other solutions or set up your meeting space that's not going to be used for public programs, to do that, that's something to think through. One thing we are not recommending are plastic bags. We noticed a library out in Colorado is using big plastic bags that they then tie up. And the director and I were chatting about this, and he goes, after we bagged about 10,000 books, we realized we just created little COVID-19 bombs when we reopened those bags, which I don't know if that's scientifically true or not, but it was interesting to see him think through that. So just a reminder, take it easy on our delivery staff. I think Tom Finnegan's on the line today, and he will so appreciate it if we all respect the fact we just don't have enough bins right now to use those for storage in your facilities. The safety plan, I think everyone's really familiar with that at this time. We'll just show you a screenshot so you remember what we're talking about. But just note that within that plan, they ask you to have a communications plan and that proactive infection plan. I know we all kind of laugh when we hear the name of that plan, but we're going to talk more about that today, because I also see that's another question center that's arisen amongst the directors. The policies, I know you're working on these because I get lots of questions about those too. Mid-Hudson staff is searching every day for examples for you, and we're hoping to curate a toolkit that goes side by side with this, so you can get to those examples. But many of you are actually creating those examples that'll end up in that clearinghouse at this point. So just a reminder, anytime you're able to share one of your board approved policies with us, please do, because it benefits literally dozens of other libraries when we can share that kind of information. And then, of course, your kind of capstone piece there is your staff training plan. Once you've got all this stuff in place, you actually have to train your staff so they understand the procedures, the protocols, and the policies that you've put in there to give them a fighting chance to understand what that's going to look like. So we've got a little list of staff training topics you might want to consider if you haven't already thought that through. So I just wanted to make sure we're speaking the same language here and that people are clear. Oh, I'm sorry, I see a question here from Tammy about why are some of these policies like dress code recommended? So dress code just responds to the need for your staff to wear masks. So if you didn't have a standalone like COVID-19 response safety plan, you might alter your personnel policy if you have an employee dress section to discuss what's appropriate safety gear for the employees to be wearing during the COVID-19 era. So the safety plan template on the left there, I think that's going to look familiar to everyone by now. We've tried to share that several times with you. We got questions today about whether or not you have to submit it to the state. And you can see right there in bold in the first paragraph, this plan does not need to be submitted to a state agency for approval, but it's something that you need to keep on site. Other people asked if you have to use this exact template. The answer is no, but it provides a great outline for you to structure your own. On the right-hand side, you've got the Reopening New York curbside and in-store pickup retail guidelines for employers and employees. You've got both the short form of that, which is done in the 2 columns of mandatory and recommended best practices, and then what they call the long form, or the 11-page version of that, which is also helpful. So just wanted to raise your awareness that both of those documents were out there to guide curbside. And these are the documents that are cited specifically in the guidance we now see in the business lookup tool through New York Forward's website. So that's where you're getting to at least the curbside guidance, if not looking at the phase 1 retail curbside documents within the New York Forward website. So 2 different ways to get to at least the curbside documentation. I just want to point out that this document, the safety plan and the curbside information, came out very late last week, I think late Wednesday night, early Thursday morning. And Casey actually worked really hard to dissect these two things and integrate them into the Mid-Hudson template. So when you received that template on last Friday, this was actually integrated into it. So hopefully you've picked up on that by now if you've been working in that document. So this phased reopening plan we put together, we were kind of watching what other systems were doing, and we were seeing them try to mandate a specific plan system-wide, and we recognized early on that was not going to work in our system for a variety of reasons. Not only were our counties split into two different restart regions as defined by the state, but we also recognized that it really has to be a local decision, and the value of thinking through a lot of these things at the local level would make far more sense than trying to mandate something from the system to the libraries. We all know that doesn't work very well. And so we felt a grassroots approach to this would be better. And that's why the plan that we developed in our system doesn't look like the plan developed in any other system in New York State. But we want to be really clear, we're offering it for planning purposes only. We've definitely done our best to integrate all the guidance that's out there. Casey did a phenomenal job of integrating citations for almost everything he put in there that relates to public health information. But of course, as we've all experienced over the course of the past few months, the guidance can be tweaked at any time. So we're committed to making sure you're very clear on the date at which the plan we've issued has been created. And we do anticipate creating new versions of it if we see major changes in guidance. And we'll obviously publicize that to you if that happens. So the recommendation that we have for you is to run your plan by your insurance company when you're done. If you think about where your highest level of risk is, if someone's complaining or I hate to say it, if they sued you over something, you'd want to make sure this plan was really solid, that you actually had the safety protocols in there, you had procedure in there. So if someone said the library didn't protect me as an employee, you could point back, hey, we did training on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis. This is what the process we put in place. We gave you the PPE you needed to be safe. So all of this is not only to keep our staff safe, but also to protect our libraries as institutions if we're legally threatened in the long run on this topic, which is a big fear, I think, of a lot of business owners and employers. Just a few features we wanted to point out to you. We talked several times about how we've incorporated the mandated components of the safety plan into the template, and we've cross-referenced guidance with the public health guidance from a number of agencies into that document. So Casey did an amazing job of figuring out where there was overlap in the guidance, where it was very consistent from agency to agency, and that's what you'll see in the template. And then a couple of things that we hunted down as well to answer questions we were already getting from directors that we knew would be helpful to have in there. And again, we worked hard to make sure they are all cited. So for those of you who are having flashbacks to college and doing Chicago style or APA citations, we weren't that serious about it, but they're footnoted and linked so you can get to the source information. And then we combined that with best practices from the field, both from great input from our own directors and things we've been watching around the country as other parts of the country have opened up library services before ours. Just a few more things here. If it's not clear to you yet, each section builds on the next. So we first had a couple people going, you just have the same thing in each section. Not actually true. Each section builds on the next. So we added in services in each section, and Casey went back and made those things bold so it's clear what's new in each section. So your eye catches on that once you've gotten through one section and start on the next one. And he's also included that sample proactive infection plan with the example employee screening questions right into the document. So you've got it right there. And we want to be super clear. We are not mandating this plan. If you don't like it, it doesn't work for what you're doing, change it. It's yours. We designed it to be customizable so it works for your library. I was really delighted to hear people talking about, I had a plan drafted. I saw Casey's. I integrated the two. That's exactly what we were hoping would happen. So we really hope it's useful to you and gives you that leg up that you need to accelerate your planning for reopening your library, whatever that might look like for you. So if you haven't already, you should probably virtually high five Casey because he did a lot of work on that on a much shorter timeline than he would have liked. So, I'd asked him to pick a deadline, he did, and within 24 hours, I had to ask him to shorten it by 5 days, and that's no fun when something like that happens. But we could just see the train was picking up speed there, and that you needed it sooner than later. So we want to dive into the Q&As. Oh, I love everyone doing the chat. Thank you so much for doing that because Casey really deserves that. So we want to dive into the Q&As that you sent in, and I thought we'd get the tough stuff over with first. And I say that definitely jokingly, because I just want to say I really took one for the team last night trying to find pictures of someone cleaning a toilet, because that was a really disgusting Google image search. But we wanted to touch on the issue of restrooms because we got a lot of questions about cleaning restrooms and access to restrooms. And before I asked Casey a couple questions to clarify things directors were looking for, we did get a kind of a macro level question of, do you even have to offer a restroom? So we just wanted to remind you that federal law requires you to have a restroom for your employees, and state level plumbing code requires you to have a bathroom if your building is open to the public. And how many seats you have in your bathrooms is guided by the occupancy levels in your facility. But the short answer is yes, you do have to have a bathroom. So we want to talk a bit about how you're going to be, the frequency of cleaning of the bathroom, what's appropriate to use to clean the bathrooms, how you track cleaning the bathrooms. So Casey, this was one of the very first questions we got right out of the gate, was how frequently do public bathrooms have to be cleaned?
Yeah, I see there's a lot of people saying stuff in the chat box. You're all very welcome, and I'm very happy to help. And I hope that it makes it a little bit easier on folks, as we heard. But it is yours, and change it as you see fit. And I think the restroom cleaning frequency and what you do is a really great example of how you got to kind of right size this for your organization. I know I've worked in places where we have cleaners go through the building multiple times per day, and places where there's one cleaning service who comes through, and places where I was in charge of cleaning the bathroom as a clerk, and sometimes at the end of each shift or sometimes every other shift. So, there's not any super clear guidance on how frequently you must clean the bathroom. The restroom is categorized as a high transit area in most of the plans from the New York State documents and from the CDC. So it's up there with light switches, push plates, doorknobs, and restrooms are in there too. And so the New York State documentation calls for cleaning the bathroom in those areas every shift, daily, or more frequently as needed. So you do have a little bit of an out there as to how often it has to be cleaned. You're going to have to decide, again, based on how much disinfectant you have, how many people you have available to clean the bathroom, what service is available, how often you can get that done. It sounds like daily is the bare minimum that you would want to clean this. But again, all that documentation is footnoted in our plan so that you can read it and you can decide what you're going to do. It seems like daily would be the bare minimum again. We did have some questions as well about what you have to clean in the bathroom. And that's a good question too. Is it just the light switches? Can you get away with just doing the faucets? And it does say that you have to clean all surfaces. And so just as this diligent person in this photo is doing, you're likely going to want to actually touch the toilet, wearing gloves ideally, and hopefully with some kind of cleaning product. But that's what you're going to get down to, is you're actually going to be cleaning, the toilets and the sinks and things like that, at least daily. And when you're doing that cleaning, just one more little thing about the cleaning is you're going to want to make sure that you follow the directions that are on the cleaning product, whatever you use. We had some questions about what kind of cleaning product that you can use. That list N from the EPA, it's list N from the Environmental Protection Agency, it lists things that the EPA is fairly certain kill the coronavirus based on their performance on other viruses. And there is bleaches on there, of course, and there's guidance from the CDC about how to use bleach to clean some of the surfaces. But you want to follow the directions that say how long specific disinfectant needs to be on a surface to do its job of disinfecting. We actually had Mid-Hudson staff did a run through of what it would look like to actually disinfect many different surfaces in the building. And it's a different amount of time than you might be used to. I think sometimes when I was cleaning my office before all this, I had one of those wipes and I could make it clean almost everything. But that might not be actually doing its job in disinfecting in the era when we're worried about people actually getting sick from these things.
That's great, Casey. Thank you. Casey and I and Chris Heron from our staff, we attended a training on Friday that was connected by Cornell University, thanks to the New York Alliance of Library Systems, where we learned more than we ever wanted to know about cleaning buildings. And one of the key things that the presenter pointed out to us is that if your own staff doesn't clean the building, if you don't have a custodian on staff and you've hired someone, a cleaning company to come in, that part of your process and ramp up here to reopening is to interview them about the frequency that they clean things. Are they using actual products from the appropriate list that Casey mentioned there? And make sure they're actually doing things that you would hope they are, and make sure that's clear, and perhaps even amend your contract with them to make sure that they are following the procedures that are recommended here in the COVID-19 era. So Casey, we've got the restroom cleaning log example here, and we got a lot of requests for that. So if you need help with that, let us know. It doesn't have to be too involved though. And maybe you've seen these when you've used a restroom at a mall or the grocery store. You'll see that a staff person is signing that they've cleaned it, their initials, if they restocked stuff, and if they noticed anything that needed to be fixed. That's the traditional cleaning log, and that same traditional cleaning log will work in this situation. So speaking of logs, we wanted to point out there's actually 3 logs that come with the COVID-19 safety planning that needs to get done. Not only that cleaning log, but also a record of the review of employee screening results. And again, we'll talk more about the screening issue in a few minutes, but you do need to keep a record that your COVID-19 coordinator has reviewed those results on a daily basis. And Casey's going to talk more about, keeping the results of the screening, but just note that's separate from this record of review of the employee screening results. So perhaps another log that may or may not have been on your radar. And then the issue we've gotten a lot of questions about is the contacts log, which is going to help with the tracing work should someone in your sphere get ill with COVID-19. And the language is very clear that this is to protect employees. So you need to have a log that indicates what workers were in your space during what days and times, that you track visitors, and they specifically say excluding delivery, which I find interesting. And then it is also clear you do not have to track patrons, and that intersects with the state law on patron privacy. So I asked Casey if he talk a little bit about that issue, because there's a little bit of an issue here where it's kind of counterintuitive, because wouldn't you want to be able to let your patrons know too? So Casey, can you share with the group what your findings are on the issue of patron notification in this situation?
Yeah, so in the New York State documentation, they specifically call out the fact that you must record visitors and workers, but that you don't have to record customers who are visiting the library or the business. And I think it makes sense if you consider, if every person who was going to the food store had to sign a log of where, how they were coming in and how to contact them, that probably wouldn't fly too well. But the same documentation also does say that customers may sign a log if they choose to, which wouldn't be a bad idea. You might want to know if the clerk that you interacted with that day to get a library book, whether it was through curbside or it might not factor in that much on curbside, but when we get back to people being inside the building, if that person came down with COVID-19, are the laws that govern patron confidentiality and the rules set in place by the guidelines from New York State would make it very hard to contact that person unless they had signed up for the log. So if they want to be proactive in making their information available so that they can be contacted if somebody were to show symptoms or become infected with COVID-19 in the library, they can do so, but they are not obligated to do so, which is probably for the best given the way some people feel about many of the restrictions that have been put in place.
So we never want to create a situation in which patrons feel they're being tracked in their usage, that we want to protect their privacy in using the library, and that can be another flashpoint during this situation, in addition to concerns, and we'll address this in a bit, about patrons who don't want to have to wear the mask when they come in the library. They don't want to feel like the government's watching them when they use the library. All this intersects with the need to put public health at a priority during this time. So we wanted to make sure we highlighted that issue. And Casey, we see some questions coming in to expand on this issue on the contact log. Tammy's asking, is it just the name, date, and time, or also contact info?
I believe contact info should be put there. I think you can choose what you want. I'm going to double check though, and I'll get back to us. That'll be in our FAQ, just so I can give you the right answer. But the idea is that you can be contacted in the event that something happens. You know, if you go and you do some plumbing work at the library and you find out that you're the plumber, you know, and you find out that somebody, you know, was sick, you know, that you're probably going to want to find that out. You're probably going to want to know that the place that you've been, there was somebody who is symptomatic or has been tested positive for COVID-19 who was in an environment that you were in. So I'm going to double check on what kind of contact info if it's more specific. And I see Fran asked about excluding deliveries. And so yes, so UPS, USPS, and FedEx, it says specifically that it excludes deliveries when made using PPE. So as long as your UPS guy has the PPE on, you would not be tracking him. Again, I think this is maybe a concession that they made. Obviously, it'd be ideal to know every person who came in, but it's not practical to track all the UPS people, and you know, maybe they're not even coming into your building. Sometimes they leave stuff in the back, right? So those folks don't count as an essential visitor. Essential visitor is the term that they use in the New York State documentation.
So I think it's important to keep the intent, the reason we're being asked to do this in front of mind as we think through the questions that come up about this. Number one is to make sure we can notify employees and trace who might have come into contact with someone who was ill in our workplace. And also, I think to give a leg up to the tracing community that's starting to be built here in New York. When the New York State or the county health department sends over someone who's going to help with tracing, that we can get them up and running and accelerate their ability to track down who came into contact with someone who has tested positive for COVID-19. All right, cool. Casey, anything else on this topic?
No, we've had some folks ask for templates for logs. If we see some good ones, or if you have a really good one and you want to share it, that would be great. It would save some folks some work, but I don't think they need to be super complicated. I think we just need to be diligent about actually keeping them up, because these are requirements from the guidelines that we've been given. And, you know, again, keeping stuff in mind, this is so that we can keep people safe and, you know, alert people if something, you know, if there's something that they want to look into, like if somebody tests positive for COVID-19.
Great, thank you. So one of the scariest parts of this is if an employee becomes ill, what do we do? And that's what the proactive infection plan is related to. It's I think it's a tough name. I think they could have come up with a better name for that one, but I do think it's related to infectious disease research and why it sounds so formal and perhaps foreign to us. But we've gotten several questions like, what do you do? What does it actually look like when someone gets sick? And unfortunately, we have had 2 library directors who have already had to deal with this, and we've had to deal with that at Mid-Hudson with our driver. And just to let you know, the driver's doing great. He actually never presented symptoms and self-quarantined and is doing just fine. But we wanted to address this question so that it's really clear what to do. We want to answer that question first, and then we're going to talk about screening in a little bit. But Casey, why don't you talk a little bit about what to do if an employee became ill?
So if an employee tests positive for COVID-19 or has symptoms of COVID-19, essentially you want to not have that person in the library, whether you're screening before the person comes in or when they come to the library. Likewise, you'll be doing this with visitors as well, as those essential visitors. You know, you want to see if they're symptomatic or if they've had contact with somebody or if they've tested positive. And so you'll really tell them to go home. And after that, you're going to have their information and you're going to contact county health department, I would say, or if there's another relevant local health authority at some point or a direct contact tracer line that you call, that's who you'll contact. You contact an expert. That's the first thing that you do. And that is the first thing that's listed in the proactive infection plan is you contact the experts and then you follow their guidance. You provide them likely with the log that you've been keeping on visitors to your library so that they can do the contact tracing if necessary. And if they were at the library when they became ill, there's a cleaning procedure that you follow that's actually in the proactive infection plan that comes right out of the CDC guidance for how you're going to clean the space and how long you're going to clean the space if you find that the person was sick when they were at the library. Generally, the person is going to be sent home, or they won't be permitted to return back to work until they've completed a 14-day self-quarantine, and they should really seek medical attention. And you will be responsible for providing them with some information about where they can go to get tested and other healthcare info. That might be something else that's more informed by your insurance company if you talk to them, if you show them this plan, or likely the county health department when you talk to them.
Casey, we got a question about whether or not a director can mandate an employee to get the COVID-19 test.
So this morning I did some research because we had this question come in, and there's new guidance released from OSHA, and it says that you can mandate an employee get a COVID-19 test. It's similar to how you can do a temperature check. I know temperature check is a hot button issue right now, and how you can screen for symptoms, but you can require folks to get a test before they come to the library.
That's great. That's the answer, that you can ask a staff person to get a COVID-19 test to confirm that they have it or not.
Yes, and this, I'm sorry, the thing I was going to say is it feeds back a little bit into the idea that this is no longer just somebody, a flu season or something like that. This is what's considered by the CDC and OSHA is classified as a direct threat. And so, somebody who comes in with symptoms, they are a direct threat to the other people in the library who are trying to work in the library. And so that's why you're allowed to give them this test.
So that does become tied to the issue of screening, which has been something that I know directors are working through their procedures for how they're going to manage screening. So let's talk about that next. They have a screening options. I'm sorry, I'm just going to go back the one screen for a second here, that you must screen your employees before they come to work, before they start their shift. And how we go about doing that, there's some different advice for how you can do that. And we know, as Casey said, people are debating about the use of thermometers, and right now those are not required, but you definitely have to at least screen them, asking them some questions, and you've got statements here built into the plan that you can use to screen your employees before they come in on a daily basis, right? And so that's where you realize you all of a sudden don't want to be doing this by hand. So people had asked about some delivery methods for how you would actually do this work. And so we've seen multiple examples of directors using Google Forms to do this. And at Mid-Hudson, our business office was just sharing with me that our company that provides our timekeeping software, we all have a mobile app we use to log in when people start their day and end their day. They're actually building in the screening questionnaire into that software. So if you work with a company that does that type of service for you, that might be a place to look to say, hey, did they already do this for me? And could I just use that instead of creating my own? Casey, I'm going to open the floor here for you to talk a little bit about this, but I see Catherine's got a question here. If we're considered essential employees now, should they get screened? Would they need a doctor's script? I'm going to start with that first question, and the answer is Catherine, I wonder if you're asking, when you say screened, if you mean tested, because that was new information that came out within the past week, that the uptick in the, okay, thank you, Catherine. The uptick in the availability of testing is now open to essential workers and those who are going to be able to be working in phase one. And I think we've definitely crossed that threshold with a change in guidance yesterday that would say yes, that your staff would be eligible to go get those tests that are now available. I believe they said, and just off the top of my head, I know at CVS around the state, and I'm sure they're in other spots that you may have closer to home if you don't have one of those stores. So Catherine, thank you for clarifying that. Do they need a doctor's prescription? I don't believe so. Casey, do you have any info on that?
I don't know if they need a prescription, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. So Casey, talk to us about the questions on the right there on the screen.
So these are pretty standard questions right now, I would say. These come right from the document. These aren't Casey's questions. If you want to update the symptoms questions, that's probably a good idea. I think there was some talk about how some of the symptoms have been changing. And so definitely keep an eye on that, because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to keep people who may be sick or symptomatic from coming into the library and getting other staff or getting patrons sick. So, the first question is just, do you have these symptoms that we, as far as we know right now, are the symptoms that are associated with COVID-19 as defined by the CDC, I would say. I don't think you want to go too far afield with where you get your source for symptoms. These come from the CDC and they're from the state document.
Okay, so we got a question from Liz about whether or not staff are required to be tested before starting. Catherine, if you don't mind muting your line, that'd be great.
Sorry.
No problem. Liz is asking whether or not staff are required to be tested before starting.
Are you symptomatic? And then, you ask them as well,
Oh, Casey, you broke up a little bit there. Would you mind repeating that? Are other people hearing Casey right now? Because I'm not.
Staff are not required to be
Oh,
tested.
there we go.
In the state document, you are required. Staff are not required to be tested. So I'd want to screen them using these questions. You are allowed to test people based on the OSHA guidance, but you are not required to test people by state guidance.
Great. So Casey, just so you know, we're having a little trouble hearing you, but we did hear you say that you are not required to have staff tested before coming into work unless they are exhibiting symptoms. I think that's what we gleaned from what you've said there and the intermittent audio issues we had there.
Okay, I'm sorry about the audio issues. So you're allowed to screen, you do not have to test. If somebody does screen, or if somebody does say they have symptoms of COVID-19, you should advise them to get tested if they can, after talking to your county health department to give them an idea of where they can go to get tested and what they'll need to get those tests and other health information that you can provide them with. If they test positive, they have to quarantine for 14 days. If they develop symptoms, but they do not get a test, they must quarantine for 14 days. The other screening question is, have you been in close contact or proximate contact with somebody in the past 14 days who has tested positive for COVID-19? Think about maybe your spouse or partner or somebody in your household. If you've had contact with somebody who tests positive and you have close contact with them, there's a good likelihood that you could have, caught the infection from them. So if the answer to that is yes, then you're going to want to get them a test also, or you're going to want to sort of isolate the employee. There's a description of what kind of work environment you can create for that person, and it's sort of like a quarantine within work so that they're not exposed to many other people in the work environment. And proximate contact, this is a good one. I saw this on the list. So close contact, the CDC has trouble defining it, but they do define it. And so they say that if you are within 6 feet of a person who has symptoms, or if you have direct contact with, I apologize, infectious secretions, and you are not wearing a mask in either of those scenarios, that is what is considered close contact for the definition of the proactive infection plan.
Secretions. Thanks. Now I can't get that word out of my head.
I apologize.
We had a question here from Gina. Does the employer have to pay for the test if they mandate it?
That I do not know. I apologize. We can look into that, but I don't know that I've seen anything.
Great. Yeah, that's what we'll follow up with you on, Gina. Thank you. So Brian's
the other thing I wanted to note is, what was Brian's question?
Oh, he was asking how to document that we've reviewed the Google form, and Brian, I think it is really simple, right? We'll look for examples for you, but I really think you're just noting that yes, the review happened and with the date, and that COVID-19 coordinator is logging that. Casey, can you speak a bit to the retention of this data that you're collecting through these screening questionnaires?
Yes. So at the very least, any medical information, we all know this, right, should be kept confidential in an employee's file. You shouldn't be sharing it out. Even when you're doing contact tracing, you're doing it under the supervision of the contact tracer program, your local county health department, so that you're doing it the right way, so that you're not violating folks' rights and the laws that govern the confidentiality of their medical information. To take it a step further, if we follow the New York State guidance, it says not to retain any employee health information. So if you have a Google form and it's populating a big spreadsheet with this information about employees' health, you're going to want to clean that out, I think, to make sure that you're not having this permanent documentation of everybody's health conditions. But this is a little bit contradictory to what we're told, because we need to, inform relevant parties, contact tracers, local health departments, if we have employees that show symptoms or say that they tested positive.
Cool. In the possible delivery methods, Tammy has shared in the chat that she's using a free app called JotForms, JOTFORMS, to build her questionnaire, which works well for her. They get a notification when it's been completed, which you can also do with Google Forms. You can set that up so you're notified every time someone completes the form. And she also notes that the JotForms version can be set up to email them a reminder daily, which sounds very helpful. Thanks, Tammy. Okay. So on staff training, we saw that the directors have already been sharing great resources on this, or not so great resources, but at least finding ones that might get the job done. The prediction is that we'll see better and better staff training options as this goes on. We were thinking that just like with the sexual harassment prevention law, how eventually the Department of Labor issued training videos that worked for everybody, which was very convenient and very welcomed. We may see something similar eventually come out from the state. So I think we're all keeping our eye out for that and looking for the options. Oh, look at that. Julie is such a good librarian. She already found the answer. Testing is free to all eligible New Yorkers as ordered by a healthcare provider. So there's some information for you on that issue right there in the chat box. So coming back to the staff training issue, I think what we're seeing on the director's list is people are sharing different resources they're getting where you could find training online, but it's highly likely you're going to be doing localized training yourself for your staff to make sure your specific procedures are followed and that they get their questions answered by someone they trust. So these are some categories that we've already recognized are there. We've all gotten familiar with Don and Doff, that phrase, which sounds awkward, but there you go. We've talked about screening and what your process is going to be and making sure your staff are aware of the requirements before coming into work. And that's something that I'm saying several times because of the experience that we had with our driver. Training them on social distancing best practices as well as practices specific to your facility, which depending on your building, the smaller the library, the tougher this is. And answering questions that you might think are really basic or you want to be like an eye roll, like, well, duh. I think you want to really just take those questions seriously. People are nervous, they're fearful, they need that guidance, something that might seem very obvious to you. In the fear kind of a mindset they might have, it might be that they need to hear things several times and even see demonstrations of things for it to really set in and to build it into a new habit they have to form in a workplace they may have worked in for a very, very long time. So I think don't underestimate the simplicity of some of this stuff, that it will need to be walked through with your staff and sometimes demonstrated with their staff. Julie Delisle, I'm so going to get you back someday. Stop making me laugh when we're presenting. So a big question that we've gotten a couple of times is what to do if a patron refuses to wear a mask. And there's a couple different levels to this one. And I know we've shared a couple of times the information from Stephanie Cole Adams, which is a lawyer out in Western New York who's been of great service to the library community during the COVID-19 situation. And she supplied a very thorough answer for you to think through your patron code of conduct and how to protect yourself. But the reality of the situation, which was really brought home to me in a great discussion amongst the Duchess directors earlier today, is just the reality of any time you have a confrontation with a patron and how out of control that can get. And it's coupled, I think, with what we've seen in a couple of retail situations. There's some horrible stories in the national news about customers that were told they must wear a mask or be ejected from the workplace that came back and shot an employee or did harm to an employee or had a physical altercation with an employee. And your employees are reading those stories just like you are. So coming up with some training for staff of what to do. So making sure they can see it's right in your policy, which is a grounding document that everyone can use as the basis for what to do. But I think really actually doing the training of what would that altercation look like, what to do, when to recognize it's tipped over into an unreasonably violent or dangerous situation, when to call the police. Those are real conversations that will need to be had, I believe, before we open up for this. So Casey, I'd like to give you the chance to add to that if you'd like to. I know it's a topic you've looked into a lot and have been following closely.
I think that it's just important to make sure that we get all the training that we can for our staff, and I think especially reminding them, because we are, all our staff are really great at, interacting with our patrons and doing what our patrons need, right? And I've seen this at places. It's not easy to be kind of the bad guy, you know, or the distant person and say, you know what, you need to wear a mask. You can't be coming in here without your mask on. You're putting me in danger. You're, you know, contaminating this environment that we're trying to keep clean. You're putting yourself in danger. So making sure staff know that this is a serious thing and that, you know, it's not just, oh, it's Susie, you know, she comes in here all the time and she doesn't get it. You have to make sure that your patrons are observing the things that you have put in place.
So it is likely that you could be presented with a patron who comes in with a doctor's note or some official looking documentation they may try to pass off as something that is a doctor's note. And just a reminder that it is reasonable to make reasonable accommodations for someone under the Americans with Disabilities Act. If they truly are not able to wear a mask, you'll want to be clear on how you can get them an equal level of service, just not within the building if they're not able to wear a mask. If you find that person then, you know, tips over and becomes belligerent because they just want to do what they want to do, that goes back to the issue of dealing with a difficult patron and some of the best practices for that. And you know, if it does trigger calling the police, that might be something that is being already discussed in your community amongst business owners, and it might be great to connect with local business owners who may have already been dealing with this, or if the Chamber of Commerce is doing training on this, or if they've connected with the local law enforcement on the topic, if they have advice for you. These are people who have already been through this likely before we're opening up our library doors, and I'm sure they're going to be willing to share what they've done or if local solutions have been put in place. The other solution I've heard a couple of directors talk about is having disposable masks on hand to hand out to people. Right, we saw that this past weekend in New York City as people came out to use the parks in New York City. The New York City Police Department was walking around with masks and handing them out to people. So having a supply of disposable masks that you might be able to give someone who honestly just forgot their mask, because sometimes that's going to happen, or someone who begrudgingly agrees to wear the mask to do what they want to do, that could be another thing you want to have in supply at your library. So Catherine asked a question on the former issue related to screening. Should employees call or text the director their answers before they come in if they don't have internet access? Casey, what do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can do everything up to screening the people when they come to the library, but that doesn't mitigate your risk too much. If you can call them and text them before and you can accomplish this over the phone, that's going to keep everybody safer. So absolutely. Just, you know, that'll be part of your log too. You know, you talk to somebody today and, you know, on the phone, you talk to this person and, or maybe not this person, but you talk to people today. It's, you know, that was part of it.
I think one of the major messages we want to send here is we don't claim this list is comprehensive. We know Brian Avery, who is a super overachiever, posted a very detailed list of staff training that they're going to do. You're going to figure out what's right for you. I would just suggest that you don't underestimate walking people through what you might think are some very basic things. I think you'll want to be able to say that you did that training and that you redid that training, and then when things changed, you did it again. One of the mindsets I always try to have when it comes to risk management is if someone got sick, what would I wish I had done? Did I do everything I could? And training is going to be a piece of that answer for you. A more negative way to think about it is if I got sued, what am I going to wish I could show during the discovery process of that lawsuit that, hey, we did all the best practices. We followed all the guidance that was out there and we trained the staff on it. So you'll want to keep record of when you did training, who attended the training, and even maybe getting your staff to sign off on training like you do for your employee handbook, that the staff have to sign that they received it. And you can't always force them to read it, but at least they received it. And in this case, receiving training on something is something you'll want to document as well long term. Casey, anything else you'd like to say in this area? I think we already covered the what to do if a staff person or patron presents as symptomatic. Well, we covered what a staff person, when a staff person presents as symptomatic. We didn't cover when a patron presents as symptomatic.
So this one so we can answer this question a little bit with some information that also came from Stephanie Cole, who is the Western New York lawyer that we talked about earlier. And she had some guidance, and it follows similar to the guidance that we had before, only it's a little bit different, but essentially contact your local health department and see what they say and see how to handle it. This would be in the case that a patron came to you and told you, you know, hey, I was there the other day and I was symptomatic. And if you can, while preserving the patron's confidential records, confidential library records, and preserving their, you know, confidentiality of their medical records, if you can reach out to patrons who are, say, at a program, right? This is going to be a few months from now, or at least let staff know that they were in contact with somebody who was presented as symptomatic of this. It's obviously just the right thing to do as a human being. It's also, the right thing to do to protect your staff who are an asset to run your building. If you lose a couple of staff members, you're probably not going to be able to open. So you're going to want to make sure that everybody has the chances they need to get the kind of care that they're going to need to get back to work, if that's, your really bottom line of what you're trying to do here.
So we got some questions about interactions with staff, not just at the, of course, we're all in our minds right now, we are just talking about curbside, but we've already got people thinking about what if someone tries to pay their fines during a curbside interaction and they want to hand me cash? What do I do? Casey, any tips for people?
So the New York State documentation would say to reduce cash handling as much as possible. I think a lot of us waive a lot of fines a lot of times, or let people check things out even though they have a couple of dollars on their account. This might be a good time to be loose with that. There's not a lot of great options. You can quarantine the money as you would quarantine books in the collection, or disinfect it, but as much as you can reduce handling cash as possible, you should do so.
Another question we got that's related to this is, I know a lot of library directors are thinking through the "and" issue, that we're going to do curbside, and we might think about notary service, or how we might do, and I just forgot which director told me this, but they were thinking about how to do remote printing, where someone could send a print job from their home and pick it up at the library as a curbside service item. Someone was talking about, what about if I want to let people in to use the copy machine because they're desperate to make copies? Any advice on the front of using the library's technology on an appointment level basis, which might be coming up sooner rather than later in our constructs of reopening?
So I think that it would follow similar to the thinking that I was trying to put in place in the plan that we put out, the template plan for everybody, in the section where with public computers. I think public computers are a huge resource. We've all seen that many people don't have the digital infrastructure that a lot of us probably take for granted and are using right now to participate on this call. So as soon as we can get our computers back in the hands of people, it'll be very beneficial to them. But we don't want to do that dangerously. And so the copy machine, I would say, is similar to the computer. Hopefully, or I don't know, hopefully maybe you do great business on your copy machine. One time I had a lady come in and do $100 in copies. It was a banner day for the copy machine. But when she was done, if that happened now, if that was a service that we thought we could safely offer, you would wipe down the machine as you would wipe down your computer equipment. And you would want to be careful that you're not going to, damage any of the computer equipment while you're wiping it down, but you would want to disinfect it as you would the surface on, if you're doing a table for curbside pickup outside. After a patron interaction, disinfect the surface.
So we know that you may have more questions. We did our best to cover everything that was submitted in advance, hopefully to your satisfaction. And if not, we know you'll let us know. But if we missed anything in the chat box, or you have a question right after this, we really do hope at this point you know where to find us. And we will integrate these answers that we've given today into a PDF version of answers to frequently asked questions about Restart. So please do let us know if there are other questions that you would like to have answered. But at this point, we think we've gotten most of them. We see Carol's asking a question about what's the best way to disinfect computer equipment. And we've actually asked Jerry Formby on our staff to supply us with some best practices. He was coaching our own facility staff at Mid-Hudson on this topic for Mid-Hudson computer equipment, and we recognized he has a wealth of knowledge on this. So he's going to get us some resources to send to you on that topic, Carol. So that's something we'll definitely follow up with you on. Casey, is there anything that you were like, hey, wait a minute, we were going to cover this and we didn't get to it yet? Anything like that?
I think that's enough. I think everybody's had enough. We did the whole bathroom section at the beginning. I think that everybody's okay after that.
We really wanted to get that one over with first. But I want to thank you all for sending your questions, and never apologize when you send those questions. It really bothers us when you say, well, we're sorry to bother you. And it's so helpful when you send the questions, because then we understand what you're dealing with, or where there's not clear guidance, or where maybe we haven't been clear on something. So thank you for sending in the questions. Keep them coming if you've got more, and we'll be sure to get you answers. We are still going to do the director's briefing tomorrow. So if we have updates on the status of the curbside guidance from the state, we'll be able to get that to you and answer any questions that come up between now and then. And Lori's going to review the Sierra directions for curbside service if that's of interest to you. So thanks for joining us today, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you soon.